Education is what's important. Training, preparation for the expected. Education, preparation for the unexpected.
Good afternoon, Team Krulak community, and on behalf of Marine Corps University, the Marine Corps University Foundation, and the Krulak Center for Innovation and Future Warfare, welcome back to the Brewcast, our series designed to connect the worlds of the warfighter and PME with the best in innovative and creative thought. I'm your host, Major Ian Brown, Operations Officer at the Krulak Center. Before we begin, please remember that all opinions expressed here are those of the individual and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Krulak Center, Marine Corps University, the United States Marine Corps, or any other agency of the U.S. government. So today our guest is the last of our new cadre of Team Krulak non-resident fellows, Captain Walker Mills, United States Marine Corps. Captain Mills is a U.S. Marine Corps infantry officer serving as an exchange officer in Cartagena, Colombia, and is the 2021 Military Fellow with Young Professionals in Foreign Policy and a non-resident WSD-Handa Fellow at Pacific Forum. He's published over 50 essays and articles in outlets like War on the Rocks, the Marine Corps Gazette, United States Naval Institute Proceedings, and the Military Review. So it's in that capacity as a published and prolific writer that Captain Mills is talking to us today to share some of his insights on what it takes to get one's foot in the door of the world of professional military writing. So Walker, thanks for joining us, and I'll turn things over to you.
All right. Well, thank you certainly for having me as a fellow and having me speak. Appreciate everyone that's coming to listen and everyone that may be listening to this later on YouTube. I remember when Major Brown first kind of reached out to me and asked, we'd like you to give a broadcast as a fellow, and I had to stop and kind of think, well, what am I an expert in? What could I give a talk in? The fellow list has all these PhDs and people with a long list of professional and military experiences, and as kind of a junior officer, I thought, well, what can I contribute? And what I ultimately settled on was professional writing, which is something that I've really enjoyed, and I've enjoyed encouraging others to partake in it. And so I thought, I'd kind of give my understanding of what is professional writing and how to do it at least decently well, and back that with some of my experiences. And I think generally it's not just for junior officers, but anyone that kind of wants to get involved. And I'm also cognizant that at the Krulak Center, probably almost all the fellows are published authors, and some of them certainly more prolific and accomplished than myself. So when we get to the end, there may be somebody who wants to, give me some tips. But so, I had a nice introduction from Major Brown, but just kind of to recap, my kind of credentials in the professional writing space are, I've written over 50 different articles and essays that have been published, everything from blog posts, that are kind of short and sweet, to a couple of book chapters, and currently working with another Marine, Major Tim Heck, who's up at the West Point's Modern War Institute, and we have an edited volume for a book manuscript that we actually just submitted to a publisher. There's a couple of awards I've gotten from the Marine Corps Gazette and USNI Proceedings, and I've always tried to kind of seek out a range of different outlets to kind of understand the space a little bit better. So that's kind of where I'm coming from, someone who's published different formats, fiction, nonfiction, blog, book review, all types of stuff in as many different places as I could kind of get my hands on, and hoping to branch out soon into also doing something in Spanish and broadening that experience. So I think that the kind of important place to start is talking about why write. And I can certainly relay my personal experience with this. So I was a second lieutenant with 2nd Battalion, 1st Marines. And we were doing our kind of final pre-deployment training out in 29 Palms. And there we were running through the company urban lanes, right? So urban warfare training, and we're doing all these Connex boxes and clearing these buildings. And there was a small subterranean complex. I don't even want to call it a complex. I mean, there was a couple of tunnels that connected these buildings. And one of my squad leaders, corporal, they find this tunnel and they've got security on it, and they're like, okay, what now, sir? What now, Lieutenant? And it's that classic moment, and I realized that I didn't really know what to do. And we kind of ran it through the scenario, but stepping back from that, it was kind of a problem set, subterranean warfare in an urban environment that I hadn't really thought about. And I was thinking back, and I was like, I don't think I had really been trained for that, and not necessarily a fault of the training that we do, right? I mean, you can't prepare for every contingency, but it was this kind of nagging in the back of my head. Like I told these guys, I'm going to figure out, what would be the best thing to do in that scenario. And so I started looking for resources and talking to different people. I talked a lot about it with my platoon sergeant, who had a lot of experience in urban situations, and eventually I was like, okay, I should write something. I've been doing the research. I have this idea. I think there's not a gap in the knowledge or a gap in the conversation. We should be talking about this. And this was also, for context, this was like 2017. So the same time that we had kind of high tensions is the United States with North Korea. And there's a general understanding that there's a lot of subterranean complexes in North Korea, right? So that's a problem set that we were starting to think a little bit about. So that's kind of why I started writing. And then I guess I kind of got the bug, and you start thinking, well, what else do I know, right? And I think that's a really good place to start for junior officers. Is like, what do you deal with every day? What do you want to know more about that you think other people in your community, your unit, your Marine Corps, we say community like the infantry, is between not just the Marine Corps, but also the Army. You could kind of happen upon a realization, something in training that you want to share. You could have a question that you think you have an okay answer to. You could generate discussion and kind of say, hey, I think as a community, we need to be talking more about this. Challenge a conventional wisdom, right? I think there's a fantastic anecdote about a young Captain Dwight Eisenhower, and he was writing about tank doctrine in the interwar period, and he was basically, I think in a respectful way, challenging it and kind of saying, hey, look, we need to create some better doctrine here and do a better job here. And it got him into some trouble. But, the kind of why write then is because we want to further the profession, right? And there's definitely people who talk about the Marine Corps and kind of the profession of arms, and it's a profession in part because you have ancillary institutions like the Marine Corps Gazette or USNI Proceedings that are kind of continuing this conversation. And there's a long history of doing that. Pleasure. I mean, I certainly enjoy writing. I also think, if you enjoy reading in the Gazette or reading in USNI Proceedings, then at some point maybe you have an obligation to join in the conversation. And there's other, slightly more personal motivations, right? I think there's certainly people that write because they think it's going to be a fit rep bullet, or they want to impress their boss. And I think that's a little bit more self-serving, but that's not a bad reason to write. You're still contributing to the conversation. And I think there's a lot of organizations, if you stand up a new battalion or your organization gets back from deployment, there are opportunities to kind of share what you've learned or expose your unit to the general community. And then, I also think at some point you have to say, this is like what I was saying before about reading, if you want to read it, somebody's got to write it. If you're a platoon commander and you want to learn more about how to operate at night and night tactics, there's stuff out there, but you can contribute to that. And so that's kind of when I think about why writing, what I think about. There's also this fantastic book by the Military Writers Guild that has a series of essays. Some people you probably haven't heard of, but others you definitely have. And they talk, in different ways about why they write. And I think another one, when we start talking about fiction, then becomes kind of catharsis, right? And understanding, people might have certain experiences and they want to understand them a little better. And writing is kind of a way to capture that. and for that, it makes it a little more personal. So getting started, I mean, so I think for junior officers, the easiest place to start is start with what you know, right? Because you probably shouldn't write about something you don't know. So what do you deal with on a day-to-day basis? And then with that, right, whether it's a question of how could we do this better, or I learned something today and I want to share it, you know, after a good after action report from your battalion FEX could become an essay on, you know, better concealment TPPs or better integration between small unmanned aerial vehicles, right? Or you could have a really powerful experience, you know, in a, either receiving or giving leadership that you want to talk about, right? It's not just tactics and techniques that we write about. You know, thinking of, I read a great piece. It came out in the last couple of months in proceedings by Major Brian Kirk, who's also a Krulak Fellow, right? And he was kind of using some of his own experiences as a leader to share those and write about them. So that's what I recommend for junior officers. Like, start with what you know, start with what you experience, because we all know there's a million things that you deal with every day. That you're like, man, that could be better. I could do that better. Why do we do it like that? That's I place to start. The second piece, and kind of the second step, I think, is you got to read. People, you know, have asked me, like, how do you get better at writing, right? I want to get better. And I said, well, first you can practice, right? And I assume you're asking me because you want an answer that's not, we'll just do it more. So then what I would say is, we'll read, right? And because when you're reading, you're acquiring information, okay, that could help you, but it's also teaching you the style, right? It's teaching you the stuff, the tone. And when I say, you know, you're going to be a better writer if you read more, imitation is a good way to practice better writing, right? If if you find someone and you like everything they write, well, try to imitate it a little bit, right? I mean, I think it sounds kind of, I don't know, it could come off wrong to people, I think, but that imitation, write like the people you like to read, and try to imitate them. And there's this huge ecosystem of, professional type reading that are producing stuff all over the spectrum, right? I mean, so just I've put a bunch up on the screen, but this is kind of a small fraction of what's out there. I mean, I think most Marines are familiar with the Marine Corps Gazette, right? And that's just like the very tip of the iceberg. That's, you know, professional topics, professional notes. It's published online. It's published in print. And if you kind of use that as the standard, there are publications that are kind of much more casual. You've got stuff that's only published online, right? Small Wars Journal, which is kind of thematically focused. Grounded Curiosity, that's Australian, right? Also the Cove. Wavell Room is almost more like a blog. It's British military thought. And then you've got stuff on the other end that's like more, I don't want to say more serious, but more academic. It's probably a good way to put it. Public parameters from the Army War College, Joint Forces Quarterly from National Defense University Press. So there's kind of different levels. You could go more foreign policy and read stuff like foreign policy and foreign affairs. Go more news, Marine Corps Times, Defense News, Defense One. I think it really depends on what you like to read. And I guess what I would say is the environment is so large that whatever you're interested in, you can find it and read about it. But just start reading and start understanding kind of the way that the environment is built and the different tone and stuff. And so then I think you got to think about it. You have to kind of gestate on your writing, right? So you have an idea, right? So that's where we started with. You had an idea, either a topic you wanted to write about, or you knew you wanted to write about. So you picked a topic, something that you know about. You've read, so you've started to kind of understand the way that professional writing is done. then I think you've got to kind of put that and socialize your argument, discuss it with your peers, mentors, reach out to your boss, hey, captain, hey, major, hey, lieutenant colonel, hey, Johnny, what do you think about this? I had this idea, I did some reading for context. I think I kind of understand the problem. This is my solution. This is my argument. What do you think? Or do more research, right? Get some negative feedback. Look about what people are saying that would rebut what you're saying. Because generally, when we're talking about professional writing, you're writing to inform or you're writing to persuade. So you're either putting together an argument or you're telling people something that you think they don't already know. And important to putting those pieces together is doing, heard someone say it really well, and what they said was do your reading. So that's kind of the first step. And do some research. Make sure you understand the concept, the context. Sorry, so you're not telling people something that they heard from a different author who has better credentials than you 6 months ago, right? Like, don't make an old argument or an argument that's already been discredited unless you're adding something new. So you have to kind of understand some of the context around the argument that you're making or the history of the issue at hand. And I suppose the other reason you could be writing is you could be writing to entertain, right? And I think there's been this huge growth in military fiction, which is fantastic. I've written some, read a ton of it. It's fun to do. I don't think I'm very good at it. There's other people in the audience that are much better at it than me, but that's another kind of slightly removed topic, right? It's still professional, but it's cut a little bit differently. And in that case, you'd be writing to entertain. And I should say, the Krulak Center just released their call for fiction submissions, which excited to work. And that's another great way to get your foot in the door is essay contests and calls for submissions. Sorry, I think you guys can probably hear the police outside. Hopefully they're not coming for me. Okay. And then eventually you have to sit down and just do the writing. And there's a lot of people that say, write a little bit each day. And I think that's great advice. That's not actually what I do. I kind of write more in spurts. But if you write a little bit each day, you get there. And I think lots and lots of authors have written, how to write books, and they've talked about their experiences. Stephen King is a great example of someone who's talked a lot about his own experiences writing. And everyone will tell you the first draft is going to be absolutely horrible, right? I think a lot of times the first draft, if you assume the first draft is going to be horrible, it's actually a little better than that. But the point being, the first step is getting it out of your head and onto paper. You have to get it out there, and then once you have it, it's a lot easier, I think, to kind of shape it and massage it or cut it or edit it, revise it, send it to somebody else and get some feedback. But first, you have to just get it out of your head. And I've also found, in that process of getting it out of your head, a lot of times you realize that what you thought was a really great idea is actually not such a good idea because it sounded so much better in your head than it sounded on the paper. But then you have something on the paper and you can shape it and mold it into what you want to see. And like I said, you can send it to other people and get feedback. That's a good way. People will talk about writer's block, right? If you just can't get anything, send it to somebody you trust, right? And say, hey, what do you think about this? Or do your worst, and maybe tell them I'm not so interested in the grammar and the mechanics. I want to know what you think about my idea. And just get it out there. A couple points on style. I've definitely noticed as an editor, because I do editing. I volunteer as an editor for SimSec and Strife Blog, which is out of King's College in London. And one of the things that I always notice about kind of new writers is it's almost like they're trying too hard with with their prose, with their style, trying to use bigger words that don't quite fit. Their sentences are longer and more complex. And it's, my advice to them is always keep it simple. And that's kind of one of the big picture tenets of the style of writing in English, especially in the United States, is like keep it simple. Even in my own writing, when I look at first draft through final product, my sentences get shorter, my words get simpler and more concise. And in that way, there's, military writing guides. The Army has a manual for how to do professional writing. Some stuff in the correspondence manual. I think that's a crazy place to go for style guidance, but those references absolutely hammer, like, it's simple, make it concise, don't make it any longer than it has to be. And that's really good advice for any writing in the English language, poetry. Keep it simple and easy to understand. Your authors are gonna thank you. So moving on to publishing. Okay, so now you want to publish. You've got a draft. You had an idea. You did the reading. Okay, so you understand the context or the history of an idea. You know what some other people think about it. All these ideas. You're not the first. Never think that you're the first guy to write about something, right? Even if it was some guy back in the 1920s or the 1960s, right? Do some background research and figure out who was talking about this issue before you. What did they have to say on it? Is that worth including in your piece? So you've done the research, you have the idea, you've thought about it, you've talked about it with your mentors or with your peers. You've actually written something, and you're ready to submit it somewhere. So I think the kind of first step is you got to think about, where do you want to publish? And I think to answer that question, you need to think about your intent. Back to that first question of why we write is, why are you writing this? Do you think that you have identified a new tactic or TTP that all infantry platoon commanders should know? Well, then you got to think of what are infantry platoon commanders reading, so you can write it in a place where they're likely to read it. Or you want to write something that, someone at about acquisition, and you hope that someone at Systems Command will read it. What are those Systems Command, where you want to tell a story, relay a piece of your Marine Corps experience to an outside audience, right? That's going to be a different outlet. It's going to be a different type of piece. And then so start with kind of intent and audience. Who do you want to read what you're writing? Then you start necking down specific publications, right? And within that, like I was saying before, there's a huge variety. So some places take essay, JAMS, the Journal of Advanced Military Studies, published out of Marine Corps University. They're going to take stuff between probably 4,000 and 10,000 words. So that's a huge piece, academic tone, lots of citations, etc. Marine Corps Times or Defense News, they might take something that's 600 or 800 words, doesn't have any footnotes. You have to know what you're talking about, some background, but you don't have to cite everything, right? Or somewhere like Strife Blog, do editing, they want stuff about 1,000 words. Might put in hyperlinks, So I think you got to start thinking then about tone. What the draft that you have, kind of know who you want your audience to be. What's the tone that you've written? Did you use hyperlinks? Did you use footnotes? Is it all just your own experience? Lighthearted? Are you academic? There's different ways you can shape that. And then once you really start looking at different outlets, how to read the submission guidelines. And this is something that as an editor just drives people absolutely crazy, because all these websites have submission guidelines. We want our submissions to be between this and many words and this many words. This is the formatting that we use. These are our tips. et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then, of course, a lot of them say, if you want to publish with us, you need to read, you need to be reading what we write, so that you generally kind of know the kind of pieces that we like. And yeah, I can say as an editor, when you get something that's significantly outside your submission guidelines, that's kind of like an automatic rejection. So think about intent. What's your intent? Who do you want your audience to be? What tone, length, and style? Make sure you meet the submission guidelines, and then hit submit. Put it out there. And if you don't, if you think that you have kind of a little, if you need a little more confidence, show it to somebody you trust. Show it to your boss. Show it to some of your buddies and say, hey, what do you guys think about this? What do you think? Do you think this is worth it? I'd say, take the leap, send it out there, and then be ready for rejection. Again, Brian Kurd, another Krulak fellow, just wrote, I think it's this month in Proceedings, a great essay about professional writing. One of the things he said is, he's got double-digit publications and probably triple-digit rejections. Right, getting rejected is part of the writing process. Sometimes it means that what you wrote wasn't that good, but probably much more often what it means is you just don't have space for it. They only publish quarterly and build up the next quarter, or it's not quite the right fit for that publication, but maybe it could be somewhere else. So maybe if you have a rejection, you say, hey, do you have any recommendations for somewhere else I could send this, right? And the same piece can be rejected in one place and be accepted in another. In fact, actually, I had an essay that was rejected from one outlet, cash prize in another outlet, right? So there's definitely a lot to matching your writing with where you want to publish. Certainly don't take rejection as excusing failure. So, and I want to talk a little bit about collaboration, because certainly in my kind of arc of my very short arc of writing career, I guess if you want to call it that, I've moved to mostly trying to publish with other people and collaborate. Right? I think that's really important for a couple of reasons. First, it makes your writing better. It's a little bit, it doesn't have to be, but it can be a little bit annoying, and it can be kind of slower because you're going back and forth with edits. But I think you get a much better product, right? It's a steel sharpens steel. It also allows you to incorporate more experience than simply your own experience, your own knowledge in a piece of writing. Excuse me. You bring in someone, you're a Marine and you want to write about naval immigration, well, bring in somebody from the Navy, right? You're a grunt and you want to write about close air support, bring in a pilot, right? Bring in a JTAC, bring in somebody with experience that you don't have. Or, if you've always had this idea back and forth with buddies, bring them in on the byline. Or maybe, you feel really motivated to write something and something that somebody else, a boss or a mentor taught you, ask them if they want to co-author with you. I think that's really important, and it makes your work better, right? Told people this a couple of times, there's not a limit to how many people do it. So there's kind of no downside except that it's perhaps a little bit slower. And I think, sometimes writing can be kind of solo effort. Just makes it a little bit more social. And then so when I'm thinking about collaboration, I think another thing to think about is kind of building your network. It's kind of an abstract concept. I was reading the other day, there's been some research that shows, if you're trying to make a connection with somebody for whatever reason, it's one thing to send them an email or give them a phone call or even get a coffee, but what really forges connections is working with somebody on a project, right? And so a piece of writing is a perfect way to kind of make that connection with somebody, especially for junior officers. A lot of people talk about how, as a junior officer, you hear over and over and over again how important it is to have mentors, see and kind of make those professional connections and build a network. Well, that's writing with somebody or getting someone's feedback on writing is a great way to do that while actually doing something of substance, right? You don't have to kind of come up with an excuse for why you want to get a coffee with somebody just because you want to meet them, because you have this project that you're working on and you want to invite them or get their input. And with that, I would say, just anecdotally, in my own experience, if you're going to ask someone to collaborate with you, have something draft or fleshed out idea to start with. Because I couldn't count how many times that I've approached someone or someone has approached me and had interest in collaboration, but need this kind of activation energy, right? Need to start with something, I think, and that is often lacking. And I think, again, in kind of my anecdotal experience, that's been the most important thing in collaboration efforts that make it across the finish line or don't. It's did I or did they show up with something on day one? Hey, this is what I'm thinking. Give me some feedback. We'll go back and forth. And I think it's also just more fun. It's just it's more fun to collaborate than it is to write alone. Okay, so some pitfalls to avoid, right? And this will probably speak to maybe some preoccupations or fears. That sounds strong, but perhaps fears that people have of writing. I don't think as many people are afraid of writing as they are of public speaking, but there's certainly some overlap there. So first one would be like, because we're talking about professional writing, you potentially or probably writing about something related to your job. There's a lot of what we do to talk about, right? So that's like absolutely, you cannot, put, it goes without saying, you can't put something that's controlled unclassified information or classified information in something that you write, right? You don't even want to get anywhere close to that. I would say generally, if you're working on that type of stuff, don't write about what you're working on. Just stay away from it. And if you are working on something where there's some overlap, that's when you want to run it through your chain of command, through command review, so that someone else is signing off that, hey, this is good to go. Captain Mills put this stuff in there and we read it, and command is saying, hey, this is good to go. If you're writing about something that could be kind of politically or internationally sensitive, that would be another time when you would want to run it by your command, right? And that's something that kind of you have to know yourself, like, hey, I'm doing a lot of international coordination and kind of planning exercises. I probably shouldn't write about why, what's going on behind the scenes and why we're doing exercises with these guys and not these guys, right? And again, that's the kind of thing that your command PAO walk you through or give you a yes or give you a no. Ad hominem attacks, right? Critique the idea, not the person. So this comes up when you write rebuttals, right? Or you disagree with someone in a public forum, right? Because that's what a lot of writing is, right? There's a lot of people writing about the same issue, and people obviously have different views. We're really good about generally fostering, respectful and kind of informed dissent in these kind of open public forums. And generally, I think we need to be really proud of the kind of culture that is fostered in some of our professional journals and stuff. But you need to be careful that if you are reading something by Colonel so-and-so and you disagree, especially if you're Lieutenant so-and-so or Captain so-and-so, that you are critiquing his idea and not him as a person. For some people, that's really obvious, but I think it's always worth, reading several times what you've written. Am I attacking the idea or am I attacking the person? Because obviously you don't want to attack the person for several reasons. Same thing if you're writing a book review, which is another good way to kind of get into professional writing is, if you write a bad book review, or a negative review, I should say, which you can certainly do, right? That's why book reviews exist, so people can write good things or not so good things. That you're saying, the author, that you're saying, this argument is not good because of this, or this was not included in the work, rather than the author didn't do his research right. Because that's a personal attack and kind of obviously not professional, and that's not going to get you very far. Understanding the kind of, like I was saying, for political and international context, right? Obviously, a lot of concerns about politicalization of the military, and we should all be familiar with the Marine Corps regulations are the same. So, don't tiptoe up to that line, right? It's not worth it. Understand the context around the things that you're talking about, because you don't want, or a news outlet or a publication to kind of take advantage of something that you certainly think of examples when that's happened, when people have said things or written things, and then it shows up, in the news, and that person said, well, that's wasn't what I meant or wasn't what I wanted to say. So you need to be mindful of the context that you're writing in, and understand that even though you're writing in the Marine Corps Gazette, and there's probably not that many people that aren't Marines or retired Marines that read the Marine Corps Gazette, someone could read it and quote what you're saying, right? It's kind of the same thing as the internet never forgets. Once you write it, you don't get to control who reads it. You can have a target audience, but anybody can read it, anybody can quote it. So understand the context of what you're saying. And the last thing is not doing the reading. You got to do the reading, because when you don't do the reading, that's when you're going to say something that just looks uninformed. You're going to say something that lacks context. You're going to say something that somebody else said better than you, more credentials than you a couple of months ago, something that's already been proven false. So really make sure you understand the context. And that's actually a good reason why another good place to start for writing is if you've had to write something for a course. Staff or EWS certainly are ones that people recycle a lot of papers, and that's not to say that those are usually great publisher level papers, but as a starting point, those can be good because you have done the reading, right? And you probably had professors that looked at it and gave you feedback, right? They can kind of tell you, are you way outside the limits with this? Or yeah, this is good, develop this further. And then you go back to thinking about where you want to publish, adjusting the tone, adjusting the style. So just some kind of things that you got to keep in mind. So other mediums. So I kind of debated whether or not I want to put this in there, but I think it's worth it. Just saying a couple of words about why write, at the other options, right? Because now we're either blessed or cursed or both by having a lot of these social media platforms. So podcasting is a big one, where people can get their views out kind of more unfiltered, definitely more unfiltered than they can in professional writing, right? And there's pros and cons to that, right? It kind of lowers the bar to participation, which is good. It's in some ways more democratic, but it also means that you don't necessarily have anyone else looking at your stuff. Whereas when you write, even if you're writing to a blog, there's at least one other person that reads what you write. It's published. Whereas on your Facebook or your Twitter, that's not the case. It's totally unfiltered. It's not to say that you should rely on editors and editorial boards to kind of be your filter, but it can be a good check depending on where you're publishing. Some places are going to look at it differently than others. And then podcasting is another place. Like I do podcasts for SimSec. You need to be kind of cognizant that it's a slightly more unfiltered and kind of more casual medium. But someone can still take what you're saying, text or whatever. So you still need to kind of maintain keep the wheels on the train, sort of thing. And the last thing I'll say about other mediums, there's plenty of debate. There's been some good essays in one recently about whether or not Twitter is an okay place or not okay place to express professional opinions and have debate. I'm generally of the opinion that it can be. Certainly, there's plenty of cases where these platforms are abused or used inappropriately, but I think the same kind of rules apply, right? And obviously, we have service level guidance on this stuff, but think about do your reading, think about what you're going to say, and then target your audience and publish it, right? Kind of the same process applies, and I think it's also a good way to make connections. Being down here in Colombia, kind of probably pretty far from the flagpole, and so I've always been looking for ways to kind of reconnect with the Marine Corps and stay engaged with professional conversation and debates. And Twitter has been a platform to do that, right? It is what you make it. So you have to kind of be aware of the same pitfalls, I think, for professional writing are almost just kind of more so with these social media platforms. And then, I just will kind of end here. I think the last thing is what are you waiting for? If you want to read it, you got to write it. We know that we want to start with an idea, do the reading, think about it, gestate on it, socialize the idea, talk to mentors, bosses, peers about it. And then when you want to publish, to have a draft and then start looking, what's your intent for this piece? What do you want to accomplish by publishing this? For that intent, who's going to be your audience? Okay, that starts narrowing it down. And then with this draft that you have, what's the tone that you already have? What's the format? What's the length that you already have? And then start firing it off. Be ready to get rejected. Be ready to make lots of revisions. I don't think I've ever written anything that didn't make it better. So welcome revisions. Editors at these places know what they're talking about. But I guess what I really want to leave you with is what are you waiting for? Go out and do it. I think that you'll find it an enjoyable experience, and even if you don't enjoy the experience, I think that you'll feel proud that you've accomplished something. So with that, I will kind of end my piece and open up for questions and certainly tips or comments, because I know that lots of people in the audience have published, have accomplished records as well. So thanks for having me in, and I look forward to answering your questions.
All right, Walker, thank you very much. First off, for a very thorough presentation, because I found myself writing questions down, and then like the next slide, you would go ahead and answer it. So I really think you covered a lot of the sort of the many layers that go into this. I also appreciate the shout out to the writing contest, which we'll be pushing out hard. But that's a way to get started, and there's a cash prize at the end. So like you said, kind of what are you waiting for? We're creating an opportunity for you. So one of the questions I did have that kind of wasn't touched on was taking a look at how you capture or how we can encourage, I guess is the word, all the voices that sort of make up the military, the different service branches in the professional discourse, written discourse. Because I think it's fair to say that the vast majority of the folks who are writing are from the officer ranks, right? But that is not the bulk of the population in the services at all. That's a sort of slice at the top for the voices that are out there. So any thoughts, anything that you found sort of in your own time as a writer mentor, as an officer mentor? How have you encouraged enlisted Marines or sailors or soldiers or what have you to contribute to that conversation? Because they're the bulk of the people doing the work who are implementing the things that all the officers are writing about, right? Like, how do we get them into the conversation so that they can inform that conversation too?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And that goes back to, like, on my first slide, it was writing for junior officers, but anybody really. Because I totally agree with, I think, what you're saying, that we need to see more people across the ranks contributing to professional writing, because there's certainly, it's not like we know this really well, officers don't have a monopoly on good ideas, right? And so I think a couple places to start are there are enlisted writing contests, right? And there's also like midshipmen and ROTC writing contests. So there's certain forums that are basically designed for to kind of get that diversity and get those people in there. One other one would be the Leatherneck magazine, which is also part of the Marine Corps Association and Foundation, kind of the companion to the Marine Corps Gazette, does a lot more of that kind of stuff. The second thing I would say is co-author, right? I mean, I would be absolutely lying through my teeth if I said that the stuff I'm writing is not informed by conversations and lessons and mentorship that I've had from NCOs and staff NCOs and senior enlisted leaders. So bring them in. You know, either whether it's putting them on your byline or just incorporating their wisdom into what you're writing. And so I think those are the and I guess I would say encourage it, right? I think not just you know, kind of across all fields, we want to create a place that a culture, an environment that encourages writing, right? And makes it so people are sharing, you know, their drafts with each other, and that I think also diffuses to other parts of the service that traditionally haven't published as much. I hope that kind of answers your question.
Yeah, thank you. So also, I kind of want to, I'll be honest, I'm kind of want to look ahead as well as things you're working on. If you're able to talk about it, I know you mentioned you were working with Tim Heck on another manuscript. And since we had him on the Brewcast previously earlier this summer to talk about the Uncontested Shores compilation that he had done, looking at you know, kind of a new look at different history of the amphibious warfare. I was wondering, is this a follow-on to that edition? Is this or is this something new and different you two are working on?
So this is different. Yeah, I mean, he's been kind of on the book circuit with Brett Friedman, stomping that book out, which I did have a chapter in. But this is something new, and it's a project we can talk about. Armies in retreat, and so we solicited chapters on withdrawals, retreats, routes, and that kind of thing. And it's exciting now because we've got I think close to 20 chapters. You know, we've gone through the editing process. We've got an introduction, conclusion, and we have submitted a full manuscript to our press. And you know, I think it's going to be about a year until it gets out, but we're definitely excited with that. And then, you know, I've obviously got different things that I'm working on, but kind of thematically, logistics and operational energy, I think, have been really interesting to me recently. So I would kind of look for some stuff that coming out.
Great. Thank you. So I do have a question in the chat here from Nick. And Nick, I'm not going to try and pronounce your last name. I apologize because I'm probably going to mess it up. But I will ask if you're able to ask your question directly to Walker.
Hey, Captain Walker, Captain Mills, can you hear me?
Yep, I got you loud and clear.
Hey, that was a great presentation. You know, I found a lot of that information helpful. I work with a bunch of captains and majors here at Command and Staff. It's a distance education program with the Writing Center, and I'm also an editor. And, you know, I get a lot of students who come to me and, you know, they may have gotten an A on a final essay, and they're like, hey, you know, my instructor said, hey, you should try and publish this. Can you help me with that? You know, so I try and help as best I can. I know a little bit about publishing, but it's hard to get them excited about the revision process or to really take ownership of the revision process. And I was kind of wondering what your thoughts were on, you know, how to foster kind of, you know, I know it's up to the writer to kind of pursue publishing, but, you know, can you discuss your own revision process and maybe, you know, some tips on how I could, how you can keep that fresh for maybe somebody who's not familiar with it?
Sure. Thanks, Nick. And I'm kicking myself really hard because that was something that I meant to say, and I forgot that we also have in a lot of our PME institutions, you know, writing help and writing centers where there are people, I'm assuming like yourself. I know I'm in an NPS program, a Naval Postgraduate School, and they have a fantastic writing center, and that's an absolutely great resource. that I should have said earlier. But to your question about revisions, yeah, I think it can be deceptive because you can get a really good grade on a paper and think, oh, well, I got a good grade. This is a hard course. Like, I'll just send this to where I want to publish it, and they'll publish it. And the reality is that academic writing for a course is different than a lot of these places, what these places want to publish. So you kind of have a good place to start from. And so my first suggestion would be kind of framing that, with the student as like, this is not, because your professor said, hey, this is like a publishable idea, doesn't necessarily mean that you can just turn that in and send it and someone will publish it, right? That's like submitting a first draft to one of these places. And I think the second thing is doing a good job of thinking about what audience, again, back to that, where do you want to publish, what's the audience? Because I've definitely, as an editor, gotten pieces that are essays coming from a command and staff course or an expeditionary warfare school course, and it's not that there's anything wrong with the writing of the piece, but it's not a good fit for where you're an editor, right? So I think doing, the student can cut down on the number of revisions they're doing and potential fear of rejection by doing a little bit better job of picking a good place. And kind of doing some of their own pre-revisions of getting it up to the submission guidelines of the place. And then, the last thing I'll say is kind of on my revisions. My experience has totally been dependent on where you submit. I've submitted some places where I've gone back and forth almost a dozen times with the editor or multiple editors. You finish a set of revisions with one editor and then they push you to another editor. In other places where you send it and they're just ready to hit publish. And I think, so some of that, I think the student, needs to kind of recognize that it's the quirks of, or the style of the publication they're writing for, right? Some places would, I guess they'd call it more of a formative editing, where they're trying to take an active role in shaping your submission to fit what they want to see. And other places are more just kind of copy editing. So understanding that the editing process is not always, super painful, but some publications edit in different ways than others. And then I think just understanding that there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and every iteration of your paper with editor should be better than the last one, right? And that should be something that you're looking forward to. Hope that helps.
It does. Thank you so much.
All right, Nick and Walker, thanks for that. I got one more question, and then we're coming up to the top of the next hour here. So unless we get anything else in the chat, this will probably be the last one. So I was wondering, as you get something accepted for publication, it gets out there, and that's certainly a validation to a point that your writing was good enough for that publication, right? But how do you, or how have you approached trying to sort of get feedback to see, like, what the impact of it is, not in the journal that it landed or the magazine or the blog, but downrange to the audience it was intended for? How can an author go and find out if the people they want reading their piece are actually reading it, and that it's having the intended impact that you want it to have? Partly that's it's fulfilling to know that the intended audience is reading it, but also to become better as a writer, like you need feedback from multiple places. And so if your thing sort of lands with a thump and doesn't have the impact you want, how can you go and sort of capture that for yourself so that you're continually trying to make your own process better outside of what the editor says it's good, we'll publish it?
That's a fantastic question, and one that I suppose I often think about myself, because I do this writing and you're like, is anybody even reading it? And I think the simplest answer would be it's really difficult, and a lot of times you just won't know. And there's some tricks, right? Like sometimes some places would be amenable if you said, hey, could I, how many people have read it, right? These places will track page views. Or you can even go, I think there's a website called like Worth of Web, and you can kind of see the amount of traffic that some of these pages get and get a general idea of how many people are reading it. But that doesn't necessarily scratch the itch. Some places allow comments. I think a great piece of advice is don't read the comments. But I think probably everybody that says that actually reads the comments, but try not to. I think that's one of the things that I have appreciated about Twitter. It's a lot of people who are reading and sharing things, so you can see if people are sharing it. And that's not a great indicator because Twitter is absolutely not, or Facebook or LinkedIn. Those are not representative of the real community in the real world. But it gives you a little bit of an itch, because I think the amount of times that someone has emailed me, that I didn't know about something I wrote to give me feedback on it has been like 10 times in my life. That, in my cases, has almost never happened. And so I think, I don't know, I think in some ways, and this is not a satisfying answer, it's a little bit of like a faith thing, right? You just have to kind of have faith that people are reading this because you're reading what other people are writing. So there are probably people like you out there. And then every once in a while, you're going to be surprised. And there are certainly going to be things that maybe you could never tie to something you wrote, but will maybe leave you wondering like, hey, maybe I nudged the needle there. And so a great example, it's out in the public domain now, but DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, put out a call, an RFI on WIG, on wing and ground effect aircraft, right? And they're wanted to kind of see what industry had. And a couple of places have reported on this. And I guess it was about a year ago, I wrote a collaborative piece with two Navy folks about wing and ground effect aircraft. And that was probably the first time that someone had written about it in a decade or so. And so there's no way you could ever say, hey, I did that. That's because of me. But maybe it helped. Maybe someone read it, and then or maybe you get an email from them and they're interested. And that's makes kind of it all worth it to me. You get to see maybe I nudged the needle a little bit, and this work that I was doing actually contributed to furthering the institution or furthering the discussion. So in short, it's difficult, and there's a couple of cheap ways you can do it, but you may never know the impact that your writing has.
Yeah, no, I realize that's there's no single answer to that question, and it takes a little bit of humility, I think, to just to sort of find the drive to keep on going, not really knowing your feedback. But maybe you can take faith in people like Karl von Clausewitz, who nobody read him in his lifetime, right? But exactly. Down the road, he's one of the cornerstone writers on military thought and theory. So not to say that you're not having an impact today, but there's once it's on the page, history has a long memory. So but again, maybe not a great answer. Okay, well, I think I'm looking at the chat here, nothing else in there. So we're about an hour here. So I want to say thank you to Captain Walker Mills for taking the time out. And we're very happy to have successfully introduced all of our new non-resident fellows here doing the Brewcast to kick off this academic year. Thanks to everyone in our audience for joining us today. And next week, we'll be returning to one of our big themes this year, both at Marine Corps University and for the Krulak Center, which is wargaming. And we will be joined by Dr. Andrew Reddy of Sandia National Laboratories and the University of California, Berkeley. Andrew is also a Team Krulak non-resident fellow, and he did join us last year, if you remember, for our Brewcast wargaming panel. In this episode, we're going to put the spotlight directly on him and the work that he's done on wargaming from his perch. And he's going to be talking about from art to science, analytical wargaming, and behavioral research. So we hope you can join us then.
Education is what's important. Training, preparation for the expected. Education, preparation for the unexpected.